This meeting is being recorded.
Hello.
Going back to hey, Claire.
Hi. You're here. Well, you see, we have a long-standing tradition here at our symposium that the guests are always late owing to technological incompetence. So
Right, I understand that.
You've blown our streak.
Well, I'm sorry. I can go back to doing what I was doing if you want. Again, screw it up for you. I probably could screw it up if I want.
You probably could, but I'm impressed that you didn't.
But don't forget, I did this many times when I was still associated with RSIS in Singapore. I did it regularly, and I did it, from 12-hour time zone differentials. So I learned eventually not to screw it up.
All right, where is everyone? It seems everyone's late. You're here on time, which means everyone else is going to be late.
I'm here in Jack Nicholson mode, but I'll show my face later.
It's always nice to see your face, Simon. Hi, Patricia. Hi, Ramesh. I don't think we've met before. Would you like to say hello to the group?
Me?
Ramesh, yeah. I don't think we've met before. And Anthony, I think I've seen your name, but we haven't been introduced. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. If you've got your camera off, it's probably for a reason. Hi, Anthony. Oh, yes, we have met.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. Yes, definitely we've met.
Okay.
Shall we give everyone 3 more minutes so that we don't have to ask Adam to repeat himself? Go try and catch some of the late afternoon light in the other room. It's really nice out.
Not here.
So in more senses than one.
Yes, but it's stormy today, which is nice. We need the rain. So.
How's the garden this year?
Garden is coming along nicely, but it's been very roller coaster like. It got real hot, and then it's going to get tonight and Tuesday night. It's going to get real cold. So I got to bring young plants inside, or they're going to get nipped maybe.
Yeah.
So it's one of those galloping this way, galloping that way springtime so far. A little bit of a challenge, but.
Hi, Josh. Give people 2 more minutes because they're still toddling in.
Hi, Patricia.
Welcome
Hi.
back. Hi, Andre. Hi, Josh.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So, did everyone do the reading? And if not, shall we use you as an example of the problem?
I did. I finished at 11 o'clock last night, and I did all of it.
You know who's not here?
It's not a lot of reading.
Nah, it wasn't bad.
It was interesting. Before, though. You know who's definitely coming, but who was also definitely late is Robert. And I know he's particularly keen on this conversation. Hi, Tim.
Yes.
Hi. Yes, I know Robert is coming because I've seen him in the WhatsApp chat saying he's coming.
Yeah, we have some teachers in the group, and I think they're especially interested in this problem. Adam, it must be gratifying to you to hear me say that after all this time, I've come around to thinking you're right about everything.
Gratifying? I don't know. A little frightening, actually. Gratifying, yeah, but because I mean, should I start or should we wait a little bit? Because I could just sort of talk not the subject, but about the subject and about my, why I've done this. Basically, I mean,
I do want to start pretty soon because I have to be on a podcast at 7 p.m. my time, which is 2.5 hours from now. So I'm not going to be able to go over, and I don't want to miss anything.
Whose podcast?
Our podcast, but the only time our guest could come was at 7 p.m. this evening, and it's kind of my fault because I was supposed to. I just didn't pay enough attention to the email, and I didn't notice it overlapped with the overlap from our symposium because we never stay within the allotted time.
Once we went 6 hours.
A political scientist named Susan something. She's at University of Chicago. You know her, Adam? What's her name? Her name is Susan Stokes.
I do not.
She does work on democratic erosion.
Not a name. I mean, I think I've heard the name, but I don't think I've read anything by her that I can recall. And I usually recall what I read, so I don't.
Anyone know Diana Mutz?
Mutz.
That's familiar. She's at UPenn.
No, why?
No.
Oh, well, she's a political scientist. Fairly
You're
well
just
known.
pulling out names of political scientists at
Pretty
random.
much.
Hi, Robert.
Yes.
I get the alumni magazine from Penn because I'm an alumnus.
Ah, me too.
Couple of issues ago, there was an article about I think 3 political scientists, and don't exactly remember what joined them together in the subject matter, but I don't recall that was one of the names. So I don't know.
All right.
I mean,
So now that Robert's here, I think we can start. And I think let's do it this way. Adam, we're very informal. If anyone wants to ask Adam a question, just put up your hand, and interrupt him, fine, but put up your hand so that we're not talking over each other.
Yeah.
All right. So Adam,
by the way, I really hope that people do have questions, and especially, questions based on things you saw in the readings that you either didn't understand or you don't agree with or you have a different angle on. Let me start by just not talking the book or the project, but talking about about me and this project. So I've got right now a huge manuscript that I rolled out on my Substack a year or so ago, but I did it in order to goad myself to work harder on it and to refine it and to fix it and to make it deeper and to make it clearer. And I think I've succeeded in doing that, but it's still, as one editor told me recently, on the basis of a proposal, not the entire manuscript, he said that it was remarkable, but sprawling and recondite. And so that was from a commercial publisher, and that was more than I got from the one academic publisher, university press publisher, that I sent a proposal to, where I got a rejection without a single sentence afterwards telling me why. So this is exactly what I expected to happen, and here is why. When I started this project, basically about 6-7 years ago, but its origins are even murkier than that, I was confused. I was deeply puzzled by what the hell was going on in the country, in the United States, and in the world. And I mean, as some of you probably know, most of my so-called career was basically in foreign policy and national security analysis. My degree from Penn is in international politics, not in political science or anything else. And I worked at a think tank. I worked as a magazine editor. I worked in government on a couple of separate occasions in different branches of the government. And it was all pretty much national security, foreign policy related kind of stuff. And I just kind of assumed during the Cold War that other people were taking care of the domestic front and that they knew what they were doing and that everything would pretty much be hunky-dunky if we could just end the Cold War without blowing up the world. So lo and behold, we ended the Cold War without blowing up the world. Then along came the Great Recession, so-called, of 2007, 2008. I looked around and I said, hey, this is a train wreck here at home. What the hell is going on? Here, I was doing all this foreign policy and national security stuff, and I assumed other people were taking care of it, and they didn't. Why? So I had to go back to my graduate school days, to the kind of stuff that I was thinking about and reading about in the late 1970s, and reconnect that to trying to understand what had gone wrong, because I had this feeling that something had gone seriously wrong. Right. And so really this entire project was a kind of an autodidactic exercise for myself because I was confused. Right. When someone says to me, when an editor says to me that what I've come up with after all this time is remarkable, well, I agree with that. Right. Sprawling, well, I agree with that too. Recondite, I can even be persuaded to agree with that. And you know why? Because it's now really, I'm pretty certain right now that the problem that I'm trying to understand is remarkable, sprawling, and recondite. And so I have divided the manuscript into 2 parts as it exists right now. One part is called Puzzle Pieces, and the other part is called Emerging Picture. Right? And and as I think I've said to Claire before, and maybe I've written it in one of my essays, I don't remember. As I was trying to puzzle this through, I saw the answer, or what seemed to me to be a hypothetical, a plausible answer the way you see it, the way you figure out a constellation in the night sky. It was just there all at once. What has been called in philosophy a presentational symbol as opposed to a serial symbol. And in a way, writing down or putting down on paper as a kind of a picture or a graphic was a better way for me to get down what I was seeing than trying to write out sentences, because when you write out sentences or you speak, it's always serial. It's never presentational. That's what art is, certain kinds of art. So I struggled to figure out how to get this all at once vision that hit me, how to get it into a serial presentation in writing, and then how to make it intelligible to other people. And I've been struggling with it ever since. And I'm pretty persuaded now that you're right, Claire, that this works, that it works as a template to explain what is happening around us. And whenever there's a loose end, then I try to revisit the template to make it fit. I keep trying to make it better in response to the data flow, which is incessant and not good for your sanity sometimes. So I try to keep working on it. So, just off to the side, and I'm sorry to do this, but I do it all the time. I'm reading a book now called Infinite Jest.
Oh,
that's 30 years old, by David Foster Wallace. I'm doing it because my eldest son happened to have a copy, right, with the cover torn off, because it's that kind of book. And he gave it to me and said, well, I should read this. I've been enjoying it, kind of. But, I'm pretty sure that David Foster Wallace actually never intended to publish this book.
Oh, no, he writes like that. That's just, he's famous for it.
Actually, his manuscript was 2.5 times longer than
exactly. That. So he called it Infinite. It was his puppy. It was his hobby. He never wanted to finish it because he was having too good a time. Well, I feel a little bit like David Foster Wallace. I hope I don't meet the same kind of end that he did. But as I'm reading along here, I'm thinking, why do I want to publish this book? Why do I want to stop what I'm doing? I'm really having fun. This damn thing works. It really works. And so I think even if I could find a publisher who wants to publish it one day, I'll still keep doing it.
Well, you're just a little bit late to the realization I came to, which is the publishing industry is in the state it is because people cannot read at length anymore, and it's better to publish your book in a serialized form on Substack.
I absolutely agree with you about that. And so the problem that not just me, but others have been having publishing serious work is a symptom of what the work is about. That's exactly right.
Right.
That's exactly right. It's an interesting little paradox, isn't it? Or maybe it's not a paradox. Maybe it's just a whatever it is. So for this kind of group that's actually read a little bit about what I'm trying to get done, I just worked up a very, very short way of explaining, trying to describe what it is I'm doing. So when I say that I saw a constellation in the night sky, I mean, I saw something with about, depending on how you look at it, 4 parts, 4.5 parts, 5 parts. If you twin some of the factors, then you get a different number. The number's not important. But I struggled a lot, and I've changed the subtitle, which is a mouthful. I've changed it many times in order to get it exactly right. Because I think it's nice if you can say what you're really about in a single sentence or a single phrase, even if it's a slightly convoluted phrase. So I'm going to read you my subtitle slowly, so you can digest. And if you understand the subtitle based on what you've already read, you've got it. You've got it. And then you can go enjoy your afternoon and whatever. We can just talk about baseball or whatever you want, So here's the subtitle. And the subtitle is How Fragilized Affluence. That's star number 1.
I don't like verbs like that.
You don't?
No.
Well, I can't think of a better way to say it. And I'll explain what I mean by fragilized in a minute.
How about precarious?
Precarious? Precarious might be better. I'll think about that. But for the time being, it's How Fragilized Affluence, the End of Modernity. That's star number 2. Deep Literacy Erosion. And the New Orality Entertainment Technovelty. That's a pair, or it's 2 different ones depending on how you look at it. Combined, how those 3 or 4 things combined to remythicize American culture and wreck U.S. politics.
Adam, it doesn't get to be, you don't get to put it to the test of, can I put it all in a subtitle and make it work if you make your subtitle almost as long as the book?
The subtitle is only like 15, 20 words. What do you mean?
No, it's not the right title. The right title, Adam, is what you end up calling it to spite yourself when you talk to friends about it.
Well, the title is The Age of Spectacle. That's a subtitle.
Yeah,
so once somebody sees The Age of Spectacle, then they've got it. They've got what the essence of it is, and that subtitle is just meant to be kind of a tease.
I just go with the erosion of deep literacy and the end of liberalism.
Well, that's what James Marion is about. By the way, when I started this, the first actual thing that I wrote about this, after conferring with my key living mentor, who was Marianne Wolfe, who was the author of Proust and the Squid and Reader Come Home, and she's an unusually wonderful person. She's an educator, and she's into neuroscience and into all the things, all the pieces of understanding what has been happening on the individual level. What Marianne was never felt confident doing was extrapolating what she understood about the decline of literacy, of deep literacy, deep reading, to talk about society and politics more broadly. That's just not something that she feels that she knows about. So I took that up and said, Marianne, what if I just tried to think through some of the broader implications of your work? And she said, fine, let's do it. So that's where this all started, really. And the first thing that I wrote about it was an article in National Review called The Erosion of Deep Literacy, and that was 6 years ago.
We're getting an echo of you.
We're getting echoes. That was about 6 years ago.
Okay, what's causing it? I'm hearing myself as an echo.
Someone has a hot mic. I think it's
hot mic. Yeah, someone's got a hot mic.
I think it's Ronald.
Well, I don't know. It was okay.
okay.
There, yeah, he's muted. Good, thank you.
Are we okay now?
Yep.
No more echo? Okay. So that's about 6 years ago. And since then, I felt pretty lonely back then. It was just Marianne, myself, Sven Bierkitz, who wrote a book in 1994 called The Gutenberg Elegies, which is the internet was only 3 years old when he wrote that book. Pretty wonderful book. And of course, there's an apostolic succession of people who wrote about literacy and politics going back a long time. And I think it's even worth a moment just to sort of mention the names. One of the first people who adapted, who understood the relationship between the way that language was sounding and politics was Jose Ortega y Gasset back in 1929, right? So this was not a new thing. And of course, before that, you could go back and talk about it, but just in more modern times. And then later on, you had Daniel Borstein writing a book called The Image, in which he understood
over Orwell, which I think is really important here.
Orwell, yeah.
The invention of newspeak, which is the great achievement of that book, I think.
Yeah, but there are just so many people. But just the sort of the main, in terms of analytical stuff rather than literary, Borstein's book, 1961 book, The Image, showed how a technology, namely television, was creating the possibility of deliberately fomenting ersatz events, which then had a recursive effect on the way that people were thinking about and debating political issues. Then, of course, Walter Ong, the magnificent Walter Ong, wrote his book, Orality and Literacy in 1972. Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death in 1985.
Did you see the reading list I sent out? Did you see
I saw some of it, yeah. So, but I mean, this is not a new subject, really. What's kind of new about it is that we know a lot more about the human brain now, about neuroscience, and how this is all wired, and how this works on a pretty granular level. And it's putting all that together that creates the emergent picture, and tells you new things that you didn't know. I think probably if I have a single muse in all of this, it goes back to my graduate school days, and that's Ernst Cassirer. A lot of people think that Cassirer was kind of a light, L-I-T-E philosopher, kind of a second-rate kind of guy. And they like Heidegger more, and they like Edmund Husserl more, and I just don't agree. Cassirer referred to himself as a philosophical anthropologist, really. And I think because he was interested in human beings, and just because, I guess accidentally, or not so accidentally, his epistemology and my own over the years happened to coincide. That he's a Kantian idealist, basically. He wrote a biography of Kant, probably still the best biography of Kant ever written. And he basically believes that we are an autogenic species that create our future after our own ideas of it. I know, a very old idea, but very different from the positivist sort of notion of knowledge as something passive that we discover rather than we help constitute through our individual and collective social mind. So Cassir's idea of what human beings are is consonant with my idea of what human beings are. And so I just grounded myself many years ago with Cassir, and his second volume of his masterwork, The Philosophy of Symbolic Forms, was on myth. And before he wrote that, he wrote a kind of a little short thing called Sprache und Mythos, speech and myth, in which he developed some of the ideas. And basically, he was really talking about what the French call mentalité, ways that people's minds work. And this is not an individual thing. This goes back to Charles Horton Cooley. This is a social mind. We're social animals. And when we think things about abstractions, we think them as a group. Collectively, we don't think about them just as individuals. We're born into a kind of a cloud mind, and we die. When we die, we leave it. But we contribute to it. We work it. We all work it together. And so it's our noumena phenomena. That's if we want to take Kant and add this, Charles Horton Cooley's. It's this social cloud. This mind is our noumena phenomena relationship. We can't know the world directly, but we can know it pretty good, and we can get some affirmation that there was a world outside of our heads, because there are all these other heads involved in that. Can we all be wrong? Can we all be a projection? I don't think so. So that's just basically the epistemology, right? So then the question then becomes, all right, if that's the guiding assumption, then how does Cassir talking about myth help us? One of the things that I find striking, and I don't know if this was in the reading or not, but people, a lot of people, if they don't read about this kind of thing or think about it, they think that myth and religion are pretty much the same thing, especially if they happen to be secular and don't believe in that stuff. But that's not right. It's easy to distinguish. What Cassir helped me understand, that, and not just Cassir, but Durkheim and Levi-Strauss and many other cultural anthropologists, the difference between a myth and religion. And what I see is that literacy, the advent, the epigenetic revolution of literacy, is what drove or enabled the transition of mythic thought, mythic thinking into religious thinking. And religious thinking is far more akin to what we would consider rational thought, even though that's not its purpose, but it's much more rational and tightly tied together than mythic thought. And all you have to do to see the distinction is look at the way that the Hebrew Bible reads and look at the way that the Greek myths read, and you can sort of understand the different assumptions that are brought to bear in each kind of text.
Say a bit more about that. Say a bit more about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the Greek myths, as we know, we have gods and demigods and normal human beings, and they flit around beneath the dome of heaven and in the space above the dome of heaven, and they are capricious, and they are not necessarily wise, and they can be vindictive, and there is no before or after. You can go from being this form to being that form to being any other form. You can look at a reflection in a pond and turn into stone. All of these miraculous and otherworldly things happen on a regular basis. Whereas in the Hebrew Bible, what you're seeing are people that more or less look like, if you talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the patriarchs and the matriarchs, they're basically normal human beings who are trying to make their way into the future. They understand that they are at least partly responsible for their own futures, both individually and collectively. There's a kind of an arc of meaning. There's a kind of a teleology built into it. There is no teleology in the Greek myths that I've ever been able to find.
Greek myths were written. Greek myths were written.
Of course, which just goes to show that not every form of writing is meant to be analytical. It could be entertaining. I mean, the function of myths was to find some sort of collective to allow intersubjectivity about things that are beyond the concrete and present in people's lives. And the myths, a lot of the Greek myths, some of the Greek myths played into and contributed to ancient Greek religion, and theater. I mean, the origin of theater is in religion. I mean, that's what priests and shamans do. They act. That's what it's about. Even the Hebrew Bible was not written to be read. It was written to be heard Okay, so there are a lot of complications as we move through. But the basic point that Kassir was making is that myth is not the same as religion. It is different. Religion is capable of a progressive articulation. That's the words. That's what you said. When Kassir asked the question, how many irreducible forms of human culture are there? He hit on 5, and the criterion for it being irreducible, that each one is capable of progressive articulation. It can become something different by dint of our efforts to make it different, to push it forward. Myth doesn't have a future of that kind, but religion does.
You have a question over there from Simon. That hand up means someone is trying to get your attention.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Claire. I'm wondering how familiar Adam and well, everyone you are with Tom Holland's arguments about this, right? So he talks about the British Empire in India in the I guess you'd say the early 1800s, and essentially Hinduism was not categorized by the Indians themselves as a quote unquote religion, which kind of ties into your argument a bit, right? So the concept of religio, which then became the concept of religion, was itself a Christian construct. And I would say after the Reformation, it was primarily a Protestant construct. And so the fact that we even have a secular state in India, somewhat secular state in India today, is a product of the contact of a Protestant apparatus, for want of a better word, with a Hindu culture that involved gods and myths and practices and lifestyles. But until the Protestants came along and said, well, we're going to call this thing a religion, and we're going to differentiate between secular and religious areas. There was no such distinction. Right.
That's right. That's right. I don't know that particular author, but I would say as well, Hinduism, myth is not self-conscious of itself. It simply is. Religion is self-conscious of itself because it has a perspective against which to define itself, and that's the previous era. That's myth. You're exactly right. I mean, people don't think of themselves as having a religion until they can contrast it with what wasn't before exactly a religion, but simply was. And again, I would go back to the Greek myths. I think simply were, right? But once you get into the Hebrew Bible, and especially as you get past the Torah and into the latter books, you clearly have a progressive articulation of a system of ethical thought that is conscious of itself, right? And I also make the point in the book, in the Age of Spectacle book, that even today there are forms of Christianity, whether Protestant forms or Catholic forms or Eastern Orthodox forms, that seem closer to myth in that they emphasize miracles and magic and certain kinds of ritual. And there are others that tend more toward the normative, the ethical, and the literate in their way of religion. So that Christianity is kind of a boundary dweller. And just to get back to India for a minute, I think I say in the manuscript somewhere, at least I speculate, not based on my own expertise in this part of the world, because I don't have great expertise, but there are those who also think that just as primitive or early pre-biblical Israelite Jewish thinking only becomes Jewish religion with the advent of literacy in about it's just Jasper's axial age, so 6th to 8th century before the Common Era. So Hinduism, when literacy comes to India, not just in the Brahmins, but begins to trickle down a little bit, that was the origin of Buddhism, because Buddhism is a literate religion. It's not a myth. So that the origin of Buddhism out of Hinduism reflects, I would say, I mean, I'm speculating, I guess, but I think this is right. Jasper's point of evolution from pre to literacy in the spiritual world, in the way that people think about ultimate questions. Questions beyond the concrete. And I think that's true. Certainly it's true from moving from medieval Catholicism into Protestantism. Luther-based Protestantism on scripture, and he called it Abrahamic. And he thought he was doing something new, but in fact, he was about 14 or 1600 years after the fact. But that was the difference. He thought that you didn't need a priest, you didn't need an intermediary to be saved. You could understand the text yourself, but you had to be literate to do that, and you needed schools to do that. And one of the great revolutions of the epigenetic phenomenon of literacy takes place with Protestantism and the spread of schools all throughout Europe, wherever Protestants went. And that created a very different, not just general culture, but it created a very different political culture. And I think a lot of people, Pierre Manet, all kinds of people have understood and written about how the reading revolution in Europe led to the idea of popular sovereignty, ultimately led to the idea of liberalism, and ultimately led to the idea of democracy, which are not the same things, by the way.
You have another question.
That's known.
You have another question. But before that, can I just interject? I want to make sure that everyone understands why we're talking about myth and how this fits in with Adam's thesis. Is there anyone who doesn't understand that?
Because we're going back there. The point is, I mean,
hold on a second. I just want to see if anyone is confused on this point. Josh, how does it fit in?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Well, it has to do with the fact that he's talking about we're sort of reverting to a pre-literate politics that's sort of more mythological in its sort of approach, epistemology.
Another point that you've made in this context, which is the failure to maintain critical myths.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another sense in which this is highly relevant. Does anyone want to say something about that? Does anyone remember that? All right, Rachel, what's your question?
Exactly how are you defining myth? Must a myth be untrue? And is another way to say this that you're describing a word image shift? Sorry, that's three.
That's three. Well, that's a lot of questions and good questions. A myth is an intellectual template, right? It's based on oral language for the most part. Though later on, of course, as Claire pointed out earlier, myths can be written down, and they are written down. I mean, Grimm's fairy tales are written down, but they were collected as oral folklore, right? Same thing. Homer couldn't read or write apparently, but it gets collected at a certain point once a literate culture takes over and wants to create some sort of intersubjective cultural template that people can use to to understand things beyond the concrete. I just think that oral language and written language are just different kinds of things. They're different cognitively, and what written language enables. Walter Wrong, I guess, is the source here for understanding this, but there are many others. What written language enables in a culture is just qualitatively different from what oral language can do. Oral language is Marshall McLuhan is, of course, another personality one has to mention in all this. McLuhan thought that oral language, Walter Wrong talked about what he called the secondary orality. That was television and radio and all the stuff that came after literacy. I call it the new orality. It doesn't make any difference what you call it as long as you're clear about it. But this is a way of communicating with language that is very emotion laden. Okay, it's not well disposed to sit and thinking. There are no timeouts. There's no rational thought. There's no deliberation. It's all oral language is musical. They're cadences. You can hear it in my voice. You can hear it in your voice. You can hear it in everyone's voices, right? There's the lexical and the affective in everything we say. When you write something down, on the other hand, I mean, it's still there. The cadences are still there, unless you're a very bad writer. Cadences are still there, and there is still affect in it, but it's there objectified on the page. You can go as slow or as fast as you like. You can compare it with other texts. You can come back and read it a second time 2 years later. It is so tempting to go off into tangents here because there's so much stuff that's interesting. Try to put yourself in, a Neolithic. Try to imagine you're standing in front of New Grange in the Boyne Valley in Ireland when New Grange was still new in Neolithic times. All right, and think about sound and think about sight. All right, when you see something, you can see many things in your field of vision at the same time, depending on how closely you're focused. Right, there are many things you can see, and you can turn your head away and come back, and you can see them again. Right? But now think of sound. when you hear the wind blow, when you hear someone talk to you, when you hear an animal make a noise, once that sound is over, it's gone. You can't turn back around and find it again, can you? And it's not before there were recording equipment, right? So people in Neolithic times had a different view of what sound was as opposed to what sight was. Even when it comes to the visual arts, like cave drawings and so forth, you could draw, you can make facsimiles, as it were, of things that are visual. When it comes to sound, though, you need mnemonic devices to create sagas and oral histories, and what I'm trying to say is that sound was a much more fragile way of intellection than sight. And this is why Judaism, or the Abrahamic religions, were so suspicious of sight, because there were multiple images in one eye shot. And if you are trying to propose the idea of a single monolithic God, all right, you don't want multiple images. You want one, and that one voice. Some of you may know, in Hebrew, the words for to speak and the word for wilderness is the same word. Midaber, midbar. It's the same word. Why? The sages explain you can hear better in a wilderness. It is quiet. All right. And that is why.
I'm not quite sure how this answers Rachel's question.
Right.
Well, I'm just trying to get to the difference between sight and sound. Myth is very visual. All right. It's all about imaginings. Right. It's less about it's more about descriptions of sight than it is about sound. And religion is I think has a slightly different balance in that.
Can I
You also asked whether it has to be untrue.
Can I have a go at answering Rachel's question?
Sure.
I'm probably not going to do very well, but I'm going to try. So, Adam, if I kind of summarize what you have just said and try and extract something from it, I think that written language is a standardization device in the sense that it is an attempt to from a pre-written language from the point of view of a pre-written language culture. You could say it's an attempt to harmonize the mental models of the tribe, right? Because to your point, right, like it's more it's more replicatable. It's much easier to be precise. So I think what it allows for, or one of the things it allows for, is for telos to emerge in a more focused way. So to me, it's the language that drives, the written language that drives the monotheism and not the other way around, right? And we see this, so Yahweh, right? Yeah, sure, it's a feedback loop, but so Yahweh was one of four Hebrew gods. I think there was Baal, there was Yahweh, there were. Am I right about this?
It depends how you count. Speculation,
Sure.
No,
So
Baal wasn't Hebrew.
No, Baal was. But there was. If you look at the first paragraphs of Genesis, you see two deities. A lot of analysts have thought that one was from the northern kingdom of Israel, which was destroyed, and the other was Judean. Probably true. A book called How to Read the Hebrew Bible by James Kugel is the best book you could possibly read on the subject. Yeah. But yeah, there were multiple deities, and it had to come together. That's right. Yeah,
they had to come together, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one, right? Like, I mean, think about that. That is an attempt at cultural telic alignment that is probably, based on what you're saying, extremely difficult without written language. And so there needs to be a unity of purpose in the tribe, and this is impossible with a polytheistic, whimsical. Well, like the polytheistic gods have to be combined. And what I think is so interesting is then for 1,000 years after that, or 1,500 years after that, there's this tremendous tension in the Trinity. And there are these constant, I'm going to Christianity now, but there are these constant um, aggressively suppressed efforts to actually eliminate the Trinity and go even more unitary than the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of see this attempt at sort of telic, alignment, and you sort of see that there's some ties there to sort of Platonism, right? Which is again, in a world in which there's no written language, everything's just capricious and specific. There's no categorization of. This was Sam Chris's essay that I shared this morning. There's no categorization of things at the abstract layer. Like when I was training my dog, the dog trainer lady said, they can't generalize. You have to understand they can't generalize. That's not true. I've got a very smart dog, but
I was going to say that's not true. My dog either.
Oh, this is funny, but I'll go back to this here.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to put a ribbon on this now. But so the language is a much more precise alignment mechanism, and I think it's hard if you sort of put your mind into a non-linguistic world with sort of just rudimentary oral spoken language. It's hard to create complex collective
that's right
projects.
I think that's very well said. I see your hand, but let me just sort of end the paragraph, as it were. You can't have intergenerational and you can't have large intersubjective understandings about the forces thought to be loose in the world unless you can write it down. Okay. Otherwise, it becomes quite capricious. And you can't have libraries. You can't have archives. You can't have law.
Rachel disagrees.
You can have charismatic authority. You can have traditional authority.
Hear why Rachel disagrees.
Normal.
I think Homer was that sort of library. You had the what was the terrible name they were called? The Homeroids, where they took Homer as their scripture, and if Homer said this food is good, they ate only that food. And Homer was a kind of librarian himself that was all oral. I'm wondering if you Plato kind of defined myths as, he called it a likely tale.
Yeah.
Would you accept that definition?
The way there are lots of different ways to think about a myth.
Sure.
In the book, I talk about one of my mentors at Penn, Irving Goffman, who was a phenomenological sociologist, and he wrote a book called Frame Analysis, which I recommend, by the way, to anybody who wants to get a grip on how the social world is actually wired. But he would call a myth a lamination of a primary framework, or what Alfred Schutz called the Lebenswelt, the life world in German. That's what a myth is. A myth is a useful, emotional, entertaining, enrapturing, capturing of reality story based on primary frameworks. It's a little bit like a stage play, okay? Or so, for that matter, let me just finish what I wanted to say about it. Cassirer basically defined myth as operating according to two laws, and he called them the law of consanguinity and the law of metamorphosis. Law of consanguinity says that what matters about perception and intersubjective relations is how something feels, not how it is. It is anti-reductionist. It is pro-ecstatic, and it is pro-conflationary. How a moment feels. What is the essence of how that feels? The law of metamorphosis basically states that anything can change into anything else and can change back again, and there is no strict timeline forward and back. Anything that happened before or can happen after, can happen again, and so on. It's a very fluid, mercurial kind of mental state. It is not something that one understands through rational or scientific causality. It is all about magical efficacy. Now, if you just take these two definitions of the mythic mindset, all right, and again, you can go back to all sorts of cultural anthropologies, go back to Franz Boas, all of them talked about the same thing, Paul Rodin, in one way or another, all right, and ask yourself, look at American politics today, and look around on the far left and the far right in particular these days, and can you find any examples of magical efficacy? If you can't, you've been living under a freaking rock. It's everywhere. It's just exuding from every pore and crevice under the dome of heaven. That's not a coincidence, folks. I'm looking here for the Kantian unity in the manifold. When I see all these extrusions of magical thinking from Marjorie Taylor Greene before she figured out that it was all a lie, and even still, and all this nutty stuff on the cultural left about trans this and trans that, talk about magical thinking, all right? There is a unity in the manifold here, and it all has to do, in my opinion, with, again, the fact that people are freaked out about the, you want to call it precarious or fragilized nation, fragilized character of our mass affluence, the end of modernity, which I define in a very specific way, but which we haven't gotten to, but the erosion of deep literacy, the way that the new orality, the cyber revolution scrambles people's brains, and boy, does it scramble people's brains if you're not careful. All of that mixed together, that's my constellation. That's what America has become. That's what a lot of the Western world and the wired world, including Korea, Japan, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a pushing aside, basically, of a dominant literary written culture for these high-tech, high-gadget, wonderfully entertaining. I'll get back to David Foster Wallace in a minute if you let me. Highly entertaining. I mean, it's dopamine masturbation is what we're talking about here, folks. If you want to get down to it on an endocrinological basis, what people are doing is basically dopamine masturbating half the time. They have the attention spans of goldfish. They have the ability to concentrate of a 9-year-old boy. Look at the president. I mean, this is what when I look at this, I'm seeing Neolithic. I'm seeing the old Geico commercials, the caveman commercials. How funny is that now? How predictive was that inadvertently? Oh, those ridiculous, those Geico that's what when I say myth, I'm talking about a way of thinking that is on it's schizophrenic way of thinking. It's very good. It's very adequate when it comes to things that are concrete, right in front of your face. Right?
Adam, you have a question from Sean.
What?
You had a question from Sean. He had his hand up.
Okay. And it's very good at the otherworldly, conspiracy theories. But everything in between, as the other speakers said, everything in between, abstractions, conceptual language, not so good. Right?
Yeah, so it wasn't really, wasn't so much of a question we might have to back up a little bit, but when we were discussing the concept of myth versus language, which I think the argument is a kind of a quantum leap, and it's something that is transmitted across generations. I couldn't help but think of the example of law, where you have transmitted. To me, that was a great example. Where you have generations adding to a corpus that have very specific functional kind of reasons for laying out and actually prescribing human behavior. And I know myths, I guess I would defer to Adam, but myths, I guess, had social lessons, and you go to Aesop and there was morals to myths,
I don't think Aesop qualifies as myth. I think he's too shallow. Sorry.
Okay. Well, other myths, I would say there are social kind of lessons ingrained in there, but law is a much more,
I think you are
complex
exactly
right. And so anyway, that was just a thought as we were talking through that.
That's right. I mentioned this briefly. In a mythic mindset where things are not written down and the law of consanguinity and the law of metamorphosis are operating, you can have, if you go back to Max Weber, you can have charismatic authority. And that's what we have now. I mean, look what Donald Trump has done to the United States government. He has basically decapitated it, all right? Law is either something that helps you transactionally or it's something that harms you transactionally, but it is not something to be respected or understood as a plinth of a social order. Donald Trump doesn't understand what a government is as a social trust. He thinks it's a for-profit corporation because that's all he knows. All right, he is to his followers a shaman. He is a wizard. He is not the president, like we understand that in a legal sense. So that's exactly right. You can have in a mythic mindset, you can have Weber's charismatic authority. You can even have his somewhat more elaborated traditional authority, which is oral, but which is still law. And sure, all societies had a social ethos of one kind. They couldn't have cohered otherwise. And they all had an authority structure, or they couldn't have cohered and survived otherwise. But formal written law, that has to be written down. right? And as you say, adumbrated and changed and adapted over time. If you don't have writing, you can't have law. And because Donald Trump is not a reader and the people around him are evidently not very good readers, they don't care about the law. I mean, look at the cabinet. The only criterion for being a cabinet minister in the second Trump administration is being essentially illiterate and incompetent at your job. That's deliberate. This is a myth-minded administration. And
Adam,
it wouldn't work. It wouldn't be there if 77 million Americans hadn't thought, oh, yeah, well, that's okay. I'm fine with that. That's entertaining. We'll do that.
Simon?
Trump is not, he's not just
Adam, Simon, just butt in, just aggressively butt in.
Okay. Adam, hey, I think it was last week's call. We were talking, or the week before, I can't remember. We were talking to Renee DeResta, and she worked with. I didn't know this actually. She worked. She blogged on Ribbon Farm with Venkatesh Rao. So, Venkat has this interesting area of exploration. It's kind of like a mega rabbit hole he's gone down for the past 3 years about protocols.
I know about mega rabbit holes. I mean,
yes, clearly. So
you're right on.
So the interesting thing about, and I'll admit, I have not gone down the rabbit hole with him, but it's like this attractor basin that's pulling me. I know I'm going to go. Oh, what happened there? There's feedback everywhere.
We're getting an echo.
People mute, please. Okay, that's better. So this protocol rabbit hole is essentially that, we had writing, and Josh, no, it wasn't Josh, it was Sean, was talking about how that gave us laws, and laws give us rules to live by, and so on and so on and so on. It seems to me that a bunch of algorithmic mechanisms are keeping our society going, right? Like a bunch of computers talking to other computers through the internet. Basically, it's a series of digital protocols. I mean, you can have non-digital protocols as well. So I guess the interesting thing is I'm just going to throw this out here as a hypothesis. Is the human aspect of reading and writing and the relationship between that and law, is that starting to wither on the vine? Because far from needing, sorry, I'm struggling to articulate here, but maybe we don't need it anymore. I don't mean that we don't need it, but I think maybe a lot of the use cases for running society and not having it fall apart that were played by people reading and writing and laws and language and all this kind of stuff has been automated. And so we get this bizarre situation in which everything keeps running because there are these automations, these computer automations are running, and the people are no longer directly involved in those, or at least not in the kind of numbers that they were. So what you can have is this degeneration of language, because it's not just written language, it's degeneration of language generally. And the machine keeps working. And actually, I'm gonna give you a very shamefully non-literary example of this from the worst of pulp fiction. But there's a company in the UK called the Games Workshop, and they invented a game in the 1980s called Warhammer, which is a tabletop game. But they built, Andre knows, they built an entire backstory for this thing, and it's set 50,000 years in the future. Human beings have gone to the stars, but the major premise is that the technology is so automated that no one remembers how it works. And so most of the major technical systems Interestingly, they don't have AIs. They had an AI war and they killed all the AIs. But no one really knows how the systems run, and so they have a bunch of priests who called the tech priests who make everything run, because they don't really. It's a lot of self-sustaining technologies and protocols, so they just need a priest to kind of keep it going. But no one remembers. No one has the skill now to remake it. So there's no invention. There's this tremendous high-tech future in which no one has the capability to invent anything. So maybe some gaming dude in the UK in 1982 had a vision of this future and embedded it in this game. I'm going to leave that there.
Did you ever see the old movie, The Time Machine, made out of H.G. Wells's 1895 book, The Time Machine? In the movie,
long time ago,
made in the 60s, they're a bunch of Eloi, you know.
Yeah.
When the sirens sound, the Elois go down into the shelters where the Morlocks butcher them and eat them. Well, I think that's a very good analogy, what you're saying. But I refer to people nowadays who allow algorithms to run their lives as basically Eloi with debit cards. But I think I see Andre, I see your hand. I think you have to realize, though, that technology by itself never does anything. Technology is only operant when two other things happen to it. One is techniques are developed that use the technology for certain human purposes, and when the technology and the techniques are embedded in some kind of social matrix of one kind or another. So when people talk about, well, you know, the algorithms can run our lives and we don't have to be bothered. We could just go to what David Foster Wallace called total entertainment, right? The problem is, where are the experts who are devising the techniques? What kind of social embeddedness are we talking about? We're talking about the 5 or 7 major huge companies that are all in the United States in private hands and not regulated at all. If you're okay with that, that's fine.
Well, Adam,
I'm not okay with that.
Hold on.
I don't.
Andre asked his question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, not so much a question, but when I read your articles, and I've read them for years now, so
Well,
I was quite familiar. Yeah, I guess the first article I read of you was about Sylvester, the Feast of Sylvester and its origins.
Oh,
and
that's a different subject.
That's a very different subject. But when I read the latest set of articles here about the age of spectacle, I was thinking about the effects this will have in the real world. I mean, we have seen, and Claire has written about it, what corruption did to Turkey with all those buildings collapsing because they had no construction permits and they were retroactively permitted for a bakshish, and they all crumbled, which also brought Erdogan to power, and then he went on and did the same thing. I think when we do not have a concept of ethics or morals or truth, if these concepts go the way everything goes in a Twitter feed, then we will be intellectually poorer for it, and we will not be able to sustain our societies here. This is a moral rot. It is a corruption of the mind. We lose everything which makes us human. And we will turn to reptiles, basically, just snapping at the next dopamine shot on a screen. It's horrifying.
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned the brain, because there was I forget the guy's name. When you get old like me, you can't remember names anymore so well. But there was a guy about back in the 1950s who created this model of the brain called the triune brain, the 3-part brain. So on the bottom level, we have our brainstem, kind of a reptilian brain. And then we have, for a very long period of evolution, what he referred to as the paleo-mammalian brain, which is the seat of our endocrine system and our limbic system. And then, because we stood upright and began to communicate with each other, we eventually created the neocortex. And literacy, of course, comes out of that evolution into the neocortex. So there's a neuroanatomical analog or parallel to what we're talking about the recurrence of the mythic mindset. In the brain, it's more seated. What people are doing, the emotional sides, the dopamine masturbation, I mean, that appeals to the paleo-mammalian brain. That's where sex and violence and all these other truly spectacular kinds of human behaviors all collide with one another. But to think about it and to control it and to be an autogenic species moving into the next phase of our existence, you need the neocortex for that nowadays. You just can't do without it, right? So the more we are focused on oral sensory input, and we don't attend anymore to the epigenetic revolution of literacy that got us to where we are refocusing our brain waves, and we are refocusing the sort of the ground, what do you call it? The spatial, that's the wrong, ground zero part of our brain. We are regressing from using our neocortex to using our paleo-mammalian brain more than we once did. We're a little bit like, in other words, children who in their imaginative play, before they reach, age 10, 11, 12, whatever it is, they're always in theta in their brain waves. Babies are always in theta. Their brains are working slowly. They are in consanguinity and metamorphosis. That's what imaginative play is all about. So we are now regressing in a way anatomically to use the paleo-mammalian brain more than we use the neocortex that we have gotten used to since about the last 3,000 years. So it's kind of a big deal when this happens.
No. Are we all doing that, or is this hyper specialization? And the reason I ask that is
question. Yeah.
Well, and so think about farming, right? So, like, and I don't have the numbers to hand, but I think in a modern industrial country like the United States, I believe somewhere around 1% of the population is involved in farming.
2.
Is 2%, right? But it used to be double digits. It used to be, you go back 200 years, it was it was an extremely high number. So if you look at what software has done to sort of the protocols that we need, because we always had these protocols, but they were expressed through language, and now they're expressed through code, and it's very scalable. You can run it on machines. It's not new with AI. Like, AI is just accelerating what was already happening. So from that point of view, the social mega-organism or meta-organism doesn't need as many people comprehending that. Now, democracy needs that, and that's the problem. But so you have this epistemological degeneration. I don't even know if that's the right way of talking about it, but I do see that as being part of it. And you just don't. So no wonder all these guys in Silicon Valley are accused of being sort of fascist, because they're the people who are most empowered to design and run the software for the time being. And I don't see evidence that either they or their children are intellectually degenerating. And even non-Silicon Valley people, I see my not to bring my family into it, but I have a niece who's quite young who she's an incredibly advanced reader. She's trilingual. So it's like I feel like we're going through some sort of structural, demographic, social reorganization based on partly on technology and partly on long cycles. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so is it possible that the white collar is the new farmer, and we're going to go from having 20% of the population being sort of white collar, university educated, literate university educated people to 2%, because that's kind of what I think is probably happening. And I think there's just a whole, Claire, you said this a few months ago, right? It's like you've got to follow the incentives. And incentives in our society are run through money, and money is often run through either capital or jobs. So you can see how you can get there.
I want to give everyone a chance to speak. Sean and Tim, you both had your hands up for a while.
100, go first.
I'll jump in if just quickly. I wanted to ask Adam, in his concept of the age of spectacle, I just wanted to get his take of when in Adam's opinion did we really start to transition into this age? I'm just thinking for myself, I remember go back to 2016 during the Republican primaries and seeing Trump stand up in front of the American people and just, spew lie after lie, insult after insult, indecency after indecency, and just thinking like, what? How did we? That to me was and the point. His approval ratings kept going up. That to me was
the debut of the iPhone.
Sorry?
2007, the debut of the iPhone.
2007.
That's my.
I thought it was, okay, that's your okay. To me, it was 16 when Trump, just like could just say whatever he wanted, however outlandish, however, and again, he would just it would increase his odds of getting the presidency or winning the presidency. So I'd just be curious to ask Adam what was his crossover moment?
Well, I don't think there is a single crossover moment. I see it as a process that goes back quite a long time, actually. To me, the surrealization of the social mind really starts with television, especially color television. The World Wide Web wasn't stood up and functioning in public, from ARPANET until 1991. If Sven Bierkens could already see 3 years, the World Wide Web wasn't out of its diapers yet when Sven saw some very interesting things. Clearly the smartphone 2007 was important. See, Trump, like all politicians, politicians are men who fit their times, men and women who fit their times. There's a milieu that's ready for them. And so that's why I've said before, and many people have said, Trump is not originally anyway the problem. He's become a subsequent problem. He's a symptom of a cultural degeneration or a cultural shift that I think has been many, many years in the making. And if I had had time, or if you go back to the readings, to talk about the end of modernity. And I use Daniel Bell's definition of modernity. I think that's quite serviceable. And modernity has to do with the ascendance of individual over communal agency, the rise of the individual, sometimes too much, the secularization not just of politics but of the arts, away from ecclesiastical control, and most important, the idea of progress, the idea that there is a teleology, that we are going somewhere, and that we have some control over where we're going as individuals and as a society. All three of those assumptions about modernity are eroded or eroding, it seems to me, for one reason or another. Reincorporating a whole variety of caseloads of magical thinking into the way we imagine these things. But it's not everybody. But to me, the idea that 2% or 3% of the high flung, the computer, I have two problems with that. One, it's certainly incompatible with liberalism and democracy, both, and it removes the agency that is the essence of a human being, it seems to me. It reduces human agency to the sandbox, essentially. It infantilizes everybody. And that's not my idea of a flourishing culture or of a flourishing species. So I don't want to be I don't want to be in fan. I have the same reaction that you. I have 6 grandchildren. Some of them are really, really, like prodigies. They read, they're intelligent, they ask good questions, right? But we have to be very careful not to misrepresent the people in our immediate lives, in our immediate families, in our immediate communities, and assume that everyone is like them. It clearly is not true if you look around, right? Something that the New York Times, I have to say, this is so funny. The New York Times was talking about the intelligence of dogs the other day in one of their little articles. And there's some new research that if you ask somebody, is your dog more intelligent than the average dog? 2/3 of dog owners, I'm not sure about cats, Claire, 2/3 of dog owners say, yes, absolutely. My dog is more intelligent than the average dog. And then the writer of the New York Times article actually had to say, that is statistically impossible. I tell you, I fell off my chair laughing when I read that sentence, because that sentence is not necessary for anybody who knows even a little bit of statistics. I just thought it was hilarious. But it's a sign of the times. It's a sign of the times that the writer felt like they had to say, it's not possible that 2/3 of dogs could be smarter than the average.
New York Times is full of locutions like that. They're always over-explaining to the idiots.
I just
technically, just to interject here, technically 2/3 of dogs could be smarter than the average, depending on how you calculate the average.
Well, you
can't be smarter than the median, not the average.
Okay, that's another. I mean, whether this person knows the difference between a median and an average, I couldn't tell you. Probably not. Just guessing from the way it was. It was meant to be a light article. But by the way, I just want to mention in the book, as some of you have seen from some of the excerpts, there's a lot of research that I have pulled upon, a lot of clinical research. Not everything that one can talk about or speculate about has actual empirical evidence to back it up, and not all of the reports that claim to back it up are totally 100% scientifically kosher. I mean, they have to raise money too, don't they? People who do research in universities. Still, there's a lot of data. There's a lot of empirical stuff in the manuscript, especially when it gets to the neurological and the anatomical stuff. And I think that's partly what makes the book different from a lot of the other good stuff out there. I mean, like I said, James Marriott, who's a writer at the Times of London, wrote this article, I guess, a couple of months ago about the erosion of deep literacy and democracy, and it went viral. And now he's got a book from a small little book. My friend Mary Harrington's been writing about this across the pond. A lot of people are onto this now. A lot of people, right? And like I said when we started, I feel like I have a lot more company here than I did 6 years ago. A lot of people are really catching on to what's going down, and I think the antics and the surreality of the second Trump administration are making it vividly clear, even to people that were oblivious to it before. So there are a lot of good things happening, and there are a lot of reactions against some of the derangements that people are noticing ever more. So I'm not pessimistic about where this is all leading. I mean, James Marriott is very pessimistic. I mean, he thinks we're already past the tipping point where we're going down the proverbial historical toilet. And Mary Harrington's also very pessimistic. I don't feel that way. I think that we have a lot of problems ahead. We're in a tunnel, but I see all sorts of ways that we can snatch opportunity from the challenges that we face today. So I'm not down in the dumps about this.
Really?
I don't sleep well at night sometimes, worrying about certain things like wars that were launched, from a Ouija board, for best I can tell. But I'm not down in the dumps about this stuff. I see a lot of positive things happening. People waking up, and seeing what's happening.
I want to get to that, but I want to make sure. I mean, you guys just interrupt him because he's not.
Yeah, I just want to, this is somewhat in response to Simon, but also just explaining my little corner of the world. So I work in the technology IT space supporting the U.S. federal government, currently or in the past month now, supporting the Federal Department of Education, ironically, which has been very much decimated by the Doge cuts. In my experience, at least in the federal government IT technology space, we have a shortage of people. What Doge did in my current role is they just pushed a lot of people that were on the verge of retirement out the door sooner. They laid off a lot of people, but these were people who were going to they're not looking for jobs anymore. They just retired, basically. And now as contractors, these were civil servants, but as a contractor in the contractor community, trying to now repair this damage and replace these people, we don't have the people who can do this work. We have a hard time finding candidates that can pass what they call the public trust clearance. So these are people, to have any role with the federal government, especially with access to technology systems, you do have to pass a security check. It is not like it is below a national security level a check, what they call public trust, which is below secret. But we can't find people who can even get to that level.
Oh,
Probably my guess is I'm not privy to where the checks have gone. We've hired people and they don't pass the background check. My guess is some type of criminal activity, especially a non-disclosed activity, that's really what gets you into trouble. If you've been arrested and you don't tell them you've been arrested.
Do you think that's related to the decline of deep literacy?
Well, I think it's related in the sense we can't find people because the work it is, I guess to Simon's point, it is white collar work. It is work that you probably do want a university education. You need to understand technical problems. You need to be able to write documentation and read and follow, very detailed government bureaucratic procedures. You need to be able to document what you have done. And those are skills that I think the problem is I'm just pointing out the background check issue. I think is more that we can't even get to people. We can't even get enough people in the funnel to even get to that point. And then so I think one issue is it's not I don't feel like white collar work is being like eliminated because of like AI. It might be eliminated because we just can't find the people to do it. And then we can't find the
They're
people
not
to
emerging from universities or from high school with the requisite education?
yes. Or the requisite ability to pay attention, to focus on problems, to have communication skills. And then even when we can kind of find people that we pass the interview, they have other issues because I think one issue is obviously without marijuana and things like that are still illegal at the federal level. So if you've had issues with that can hit you on a government background check. I don't know. That stuff's very sensitive. They don't tell me why people don't pass them, but I know there's two people just in the last year that were going to be working with me, and I found out, nope, sorry, they didn't pass the background check. So they're out of contention. Like I said, this is not a national security. This is not a secret level like situation you would have at the DoD, a State Department. This is just a basic secure, background check to work at like the Department of Education or Treasury, or departments like that.
Right. Andre?
Do you think, sorry.
Andre?
Yeah, thank you. I have a quick question for Adam. Do you think that the role that arts are playing in society could be countermanding or cognitive decline, or what do you think?
The role, I'm sorry, I didn't hear something blipped out. The role of what?
The arts.
The arts. Oh, the arts.
The arts. Theater, music.
I've seen a couple of books lately, one by a guy named David Marks, and I forget the other one. People have argued that the culture has been flattened by the internet age, that crowdsourcing basically taste has displaced a finer sense of identifying what is true quality, what is truly creative and imaginative. That's the argument that I hear, right? I'm not a cultural critic to the point where I can really evaluate that kind of a claim. It sounds intuitively correct, but I just don't know. That's not my bailiwick. I don't watch. When I was like 14 or 15, I just decided to stop watching commercial television because it seemed like the biggest time suck in the history of humanity. And I'm glad I did, because an hour not watching television and an hour spent instead walking in the woods and thinking and reading and talking to other people, it adds up over 60 years. It adds up. So I'm really glad that I made that.
Television, though, is an improvement. I don't know what people are watching now.
Well,
television, actually, I think television's gotten a lot better.
Well, television is an improvement cognitively on what people are watching now, which is very short TikTok reels. So they're not even getting a long form narrative.
I agree with that, but I think it's gotten better for two other reasons. Because of the streaming technology, you're not giving scriptwriters and directors and producers much bigger canvases to draw on. So you're enabling them to link stories and character developments over a larger piece of time, as it were. And I think in some cases, anyway, that's really led to much better quality stuff. You also now, I mean, sitting here in Maryland,
because people can't publish books anymore. They're going into television.
Right. Well, and the argument before was that people stopped reading novels because they could watch TV, and there's something very similar going on. Yeah. There are these displacements. The desire for high quality creative entertainment hasn't diminished. If anything, because there's more quality leisure time, it's probably increased. But the way that's fed has changed over time with the technology. Sometimes for not a good thing, because after all, people also talk about the concentration of ownership in entertainment venues, not just Disney, but all the ones that are out there, and the mergers. The courts are stopping one now that has to do with local television stations and news. The concentration of media of all kinds, because of I would call it the post plutocratic moment that we're in, where we're seeing the original essence of liberalism, which were markets separate from government. We're seeing a reversion, not just in terms of myth, but also in terms of structure, away from independent, competitive private markets back into these highly concentrated, politically in the case of the media, politically suborned information space vehicles now, which troubles me a great deal. So again, while I think there's been some improvement on the margins in television and a few other things, I think on balance, the argument that things have gotten flattened, that things have gotten truth sourced rather than quality value, I think that's probably true. But again, I'm not the person really to say.
Hey, Adam.
Rachel.
Is it fair to say that the United States has moved from a true written myth to a false oral myth?
True, false. Well, gee, I mean, a myth is going to have its elements of rounded off truths. Let's put it that way. In a way, a political myth is an adjuration. It's an ethical vehicle for a community to do better, to live up to its own ideals. And in the case of the United States, a very strange country. It's just a very, very weird country. Most nationalisms in the age of nationalism were bloodline nationalisms. There were people who were big extended families. And once you got past 200 or 300 people in a village where you could see them face to face and you knew all of them, right? Then you needed an abstraction of some sort to create a commonality. Language was very important, by the way, in that France is a great example of creating a common language out of a lot of regional dialects to help produce a modern nation state in 15th, 16th century and so forth. You need to have symbolic vehicles that people can latch onto and see themselves as part of a group, right? What we're seeing now is a kind of entertainment-driven fractionation of social commonality. You have to ask yourself the question, why is the United States, why is our nation, why are we together in a single political community anymore? What are we building? What are we looking to? What are we trying to achieve? I don't think there's a consensual answer anymore about that. So what the myths did in the past, the national myths, George Washington and the cherry tree, and Thomas Jefferson and the gentleman farmer, and all that kind of stuff, and then of course the crucible of the Civil War and Lincoln and the Union, all of those things were, let's put it this way, they were true because they were believed. They weren't believed because they were true.
Sure.
There are a lot of things. For example, the whole way that Americans learned to think about the war between the Civil War, the war between the states. Talk about myth. Talk about something deeply implanted in culture that was not true in a literal sense, in a factual or an historical sense, but was true in an emotional sense. It's a myth, consanguinity and metamorphosis. So the idea that Lincoln was like Christ and he had to die for the sins of slavery and all that, that just comes right out of a secularized form of Protestant eschatology. That's all that is.
Sure.
Was that ever true? No, of course not. I mean, one of my heroes is Henry Clay. Henry Clay endeavored throughout his career to prevent the Civil War. And if he hadn't died in 1852, he might have had a better chance of succeeding. But the aftermath of why the Civil War happened, that's total made up stuff, right? So it's not about true or false. It's about effective and ineffective, and what the social purposes are of the myths, of the stories that the elites create to tell. Are they self-serving? Are they trans-emolument kinds of stories like Trump tells, or are they forms of serviceable hypocrisy to allow the social going concern to do good things, to live up to its ideals?
So what kind of myth do we need now, post Donald Trump?
That's an excellent question. And toward the end of the book, I try to suggest a new congealing template that Americans can get behind, not necessarily on a national level, but maybe on a subnational level. And I think that concepts of human flourishing, like my friend Brink Lindsay is all about. He rolled out on Substack his Substack called The Permanent Problem, and he's now got it into a book, which I recommend to everyone. Concepts of human flourishing that I think involve education, that I think involve the nobility of work, that I think involve the environment, that I think involve compassion and mercy toward those who are disadvantaged or who are elderly and need help, whatever. I think, the ideals that the American ideal is basically an Abrahamic ideal. It's got a little Christian twists to it and all that, but it's basically the Abrahamic ideal. And I share those ideals. And I think what really, one of the things that bothers me a lot lately, this is a slightly different subject, then I'll shut up. We have an opposition party in this country. We have the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is woven into the society at every single level, state, county, town. The Democratic Party has organization that goes broad, nationwide, and deep into very neighborhoods. And what is it doing? What is the Democratic Party doing? Is it trying to seed a social movement by creating projects around education, around environment, around elder care and hospice, around craft and apprenticeship? Is it doing any of those things up and down, vertically up and down its levels? If it is, I can't see it. All it's trying to do is sends me envelopes, saying, we're suing Donald Trump. Oh, thanks a lot. That's wonderful. Good luck with that, right? And bumming money and studying the polls so that it can be on the right side of whatever consciousness it can detect. This is not leadership. And this is pathetic. This is pathetic. If one day when the blame is apportioned, what the hell has happened to us? The Democratic Party, as an opposition party that wasn't acting like an opposition party, is going to be singled out for a lot of the blame. Anyway, that's just a side I wanted to. So yeah, like I said, I'm optimistic. I think there are many. Look, in every piece of bad news, there are opportunities. Just have to know how to identify them, right? And I think it's happening. It's happening a little too slowly for my taste. But we just have to keep on pushing, keep on trying.
Is there any group attempting to form the kind of myth that would help us move forward? I'm not aware of one.
Well, some years ago, I was trying to help people create a third party called the Alliance Party. That was about that. It was about that partly because I was insisting on it and I was trying to help it. Couldn't raise the money, couldn't get the media coverage. Sure. I mean, you have to be spectacular. I mean, you have the shock bar keeps going up. You got to keep saying crazy shit. Nobody will notice you, right? And let's not forget about what's happened to the professionalism of even the print media. Or we see I mean, that hasn't. Everything's been biographized. It's about who's up and who's down, right? It's very hard to even find something in print media now that will explain an issue to someone. So when I sympathize with people who say, "Well, I just don't get what's going on because I can't." There's something I can. You can't ever rely on commercial broadcast media to enlighten you about issues. All you get, that's all just infotainment. You're not going to get anywhere trying to understand real issues that way. But you can go to the print media and there's serious stuff on Substack. God bless Substack, but it's not curated. You got to go find it yourself, and people are finding it, and that's good. but it's not the same. You don't have kind of national media that is curated and that's professional and that's that's issue deep the way you did 30, 40 years ago, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the whole question of the media is another piece of the story about what's been happening to us. But even the media is in a way an accomplice at the mythicization of the culture and the political culture. It's entertaining. Advertisers love it. You get eyes on pages and on screens. That's where the revenue comes from. A lot of this is business driven. It always is. So you need gatekeepers. You need people who know better. You need political leaders who can lead, actually can know better, and that's what we're trying to recreate, from the trough that we've been in for the last several years. Simon, I see a golden hand.
Yes. So, Adam, I'm going to try and summarize this back to you, because I think that can you guys hear me okay? By the way, I'm out in the park now. My dog.
The sun's behind your head. It's a little distracting, but it's all right. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. The dog keeps pulling. So anyway, so I think that if we look at the post-World War II settlement and order, I think it created the expectation amongst both left and right of center liberals that we could scale this thing up to eventually a post-nation state global society, right? Like, we started to have the institutions to do that. The EU sort of became a thing, these global institutions were hit with periodic crises, but then finally, in 1989, the USSR was dissolved, and so I think that there was a sense in the early 90s that we were in the home stretch now, that we were going to have a post-nationalist global society. We'd still have nation states, but that we could basically come to some sort of settlement where the idea of the national interest, insofar as it leads to warfare and dispute and conflict, was kind of done, right? Like, so I'm not even saying there's like a global government project at this point, but it was, if you sort of cast your minds back to the early 90s, it's like we've won the Cold War, that the US hegemony can now be turned into a series of interlocking global institutions for stability. And I think that project failed on its own merits. Like, we don't have, those institutions just couldn't scale to the next step, which is quite common with civilizational development. And so this comes up in Turchin's, there he is again, his latest book, The Great Holocene Transformation, where he sort of maps societal scale to the sort of processing capacity of a society. I think that's underdefined. The way he defines that is underdefined at this point, but it's still progress. So we've got this attempt at creating like a sort of global just society where major wars between nation states will be unthinkable. And just imagine how amazing that would be, right? Like, I think temporarily we've given up on that dream. But I think in the early 90s, a lot of us were thinking that this was within reach. So the system just didn't scale as it was, right? And so now the system is fragmenting. There's no consensus. But I could be an optimist too and say that's actually a healthy, doesn't look like a healthy process. It looks like chaos, but it's actually a healthy process because, if you continue to try and scale a system that just isn't scaling and is starting to do a lot of harm to a lot of groups, a lot of people. I mean, I agree with you, Adam, that Trump is I've always said this, Trump is the symptom. He's not the cause. right? That there was a fragmentation of elite Western consensus almost as soon as the Soviet Union dissolved. And we're in the middle of that fragmentation right now. And you know, in terms of mass literacy, I'm not an expert on that. But I think there are both bottom up and top down issues here. There was a segment of the old early 90s to 2000s liberal order that gave up on the project and said we're going to explore different ways of doing things.
Well, you've introduced kind of a new subject in a way, and you have a lot to say. I was never an idealist in that way. I've always been more a realist in the way that I think about things, and I've always been a follower of something that Dick Gregory once said. I hope everybody still remembers who Dick Gregory was. He said, "Start with the truth before you tamper with it." In other words, be honest with yourself about what human nature is and what will and will not scale, and don't. I think it was Walter Lippmann who once said, "It is a disease of the soul to fall in love with impossible things." And this notion of a totally pacific liberal global order in which there would never be war, and so that was a disease of the soul, in my opinion, falling in love with impossible things, and the reaction to that, to the failure of that, allows people like Stephen Miller to get up with Jake Tapper of the New York Times and rant about the so-called neoliberal order, using the word neoliberal in an American way, of course, which doesn't actually track with the way that everybody else uses it. But the man is just a lunatic. So it's created a backlash. The failure has created a backlash, and it's created that whole effort, the so-called globalization, economic globalization, created a lot of great winners, but also a lot of déclassé losers, and it didn't scale for perfectly understandable social and economic reasons. Let me say, by the way, that the scaling problem is interesting. I'm glad you raised it. There's a relatively new book called Super Bloom by Nicholas Carr, who's a journalist, a very good journalist, and I recommend Super Bloom. Nicholas Carr is the guy who wrote back in 2010 a book called The Shallows, which is an early and terrific book. I mean, he noticed what was happening to his own attention spans. It took other people decades to figure out what he was talking about. But this relatively new book, Super Bloom, is really worth your time if you have the time to spend on it. He covers a lot of important ground. Last thing I want to say, I've been trying to find a silver lining to the second Trump administration, to the lunatic train wreck of the Iran war. I've been trying to find some silver lining, and I've tentatively found one. I may even write about it today or tomorrow. I want to do this quickly. I got a friend from Swarthmore College many years ago, a guy named Jim Kurth. Some of you may have run across Jim Kurth's name. Jim Kurth created this notion of the secularization of the idealism of Protestant eschatology, and referred to the Protestant deformation, not the Protestant Reformation, but the Protestant deformation. And what Jim Kurth meant by that was taking the Protestant tradition, especially the eschatological tradition, secularizing it, and then arming it, basically. So there was a kind of universalism, a kind of a simple-minded universalism set within Christianity in general, Protestantism in particular in the United States, so that basically we are the exceptionalist. We are the exceptional nation, but because we are universalist, everybody can be like us, right? We'll teach you. And if you don't want to be taught, we'll point a bayonet at you. We will teach you how to be like us. We have best practice. We have political best practice. We have economic best practice. You want that best practice. And the only reason you don't have it is because there are diseases and problems and bad people among you, and we will get rid of them for you, and you could be like us. And wouldn't that all be wonderful? Then there would be no war, democratic peace theory, and everybody would be happy. All right. And here's the thing. I have a friend named Walter McDougall, also from Philadelphia, a Penn historian, who wrote a book called Promised Land, Crusader State. And he had the same basic idea that I did, that if you really want to understand American foreign policy historically, you've got to understand this secularization of Protestant eschatology, the children of the sons of light and the children of the sons of dark. And really, if you just translate the old religious terms and use new vocabulary, the structure of it is pretty sticky. It pretty much goes right along. And this has gotten the United States into all sorts of overreach trouble, all sorts of misunderstandings, all sorts of what I would call cosmopolitan racism when it comes to dealing with societies that are non-Western. Think Vietnam, think Afghanistan. We have the answers. And all these other people with funny names and darker skin, all they have to do is just figure out the answers, and we'll all be just hunky-dunky. We'll all just
Adam, that's the Christian project since its inception.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. But what I'm saying is this may now be over in the United States. We may be post-Protestant in the sense of the Protestant Reformation. This started with, by the way, with Barack Obama after the Cold War, moving away from this mission, this global, this everlasting, this eternal global mission of transforming the world into our idea of our own image of it. And Trump has perhaps driven a stake through the heart of this old idea of the promised land crusader state. If the result of Trump's debacular presidencies, especially the second one, is to sober up and make more realistic American foreign policy going forward, then I think future generations will look back and say, that was a heavy price to pay, but we've paid it. And now we understand what Dick Gregory meant. Start with the truth before you tamper with it.
And there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but just very briefly. So, but the argument you've just laid out could have been the argument that could have been made to the British Empire when it decided it was going to end global slavery in after the settlement of Waterloo,
1830,
right? And so in the post Waterloo settlement, there was a Protestant driven effort and it was successful. It was enormously expensive. By the conditions of the time, people within Britain and within the West more generally, who were against it, made really good arguments that it was like expensive, it was wasteful, it was getting us into messy and complicated relationships. They actually pulled it off, and so I think one of the problems we have as a modern society is we're not. It kind of reminds me of Ken Follett's books, Pillars of the Earth, right? Who I don't know if you've read that book. Maybe it's too trashy for this audience, but the whole concept of the first book in the series is that this guy's building a cathedral that's not going to be finished in his lifetime. And so I think viewed through our lifetimes, a lot of this stuff seems insane, and we shouldn't do it, and da-da-da-da. But then you look back on the long arc of history, and it's not clear to me that this project has been a total waste of time for humanity. Like the Protestant project, and I'm not a Protestant, but the Protestant eschatological project almost certainly ended slavery on the global level, right? And that was a step towards a global government. None of us will live to see it. I think the sort of paranoid black helicopters crowd aren't wrong to rebel against it because it's gone about it in completely the wrong way. But I think eventually, when we're all long dead, I do think there might be a post major war global society, but it's probably like hundreds of years off. And so I'm not gonna say that even thinking about it is foolish and delusional. You just have to zoom out and say, I'm not going to get the satisfaction of seeing this in my lifetime because there's just no way, right? Like I don't see it in our lifetimes, but I see it, right? Because people in 1700 would have laughed. In fact, there was a guy in Barbados, a Quaker, who was he was a hunchback, and his wife was a hunchback, called Edward Leigh. And he
became very upset about slavery in Barbados, and he fell out with all the other Quakers. I think they threw him out of his community. Everybody thought this guy was nuts in 1720. And yet, by 1860, with the end of the American Civil War, it was done. It was a done deal. There were pockets still, but basically slavery was done. That was 140 years from when people laughed at Lay. So,
well, I agree that there's an arc of human progress. I believe that. I believe that, again, we are an autogenic species, and we have converged on certain universal ideals that I think are valid, and I think we move in that direction slowly. There is regression, like we see now. But yeah, I agree. I think that's all right. That's correct. I just think that there are smart ways and there are not so smart ways of going about this. And the evangelical character of American foreign policy at many moments, not all moments, we have gone back and forth too, at many moments has not been useful to achieving the kind of world that we want. I mean, I was just thinking the other day about cavalier decisions in American foreign policy, which there have been many, but one of the most cavalier decisions that I can recall was when, after the Spanish-American War was completed, President McKinley had to decide what, if anything, he wanted to do with the Philippines. And he was speaking before a bunch of Methodist churchmen and women one day. I believe it was November 21st, 1899. And he kind of said, I'm being a little bit glib here, "Oh, what the heck? Let's take it and teach them how to be good Christians." All right, ignoring the fact that it'd been a Catholic country for the previous 4 centuries. I mean, if that wasn't cavalier, I don't know what is. But when Donald Trump says, "Oh yeah, let's toll the Strait of Hormuz, and we and the Iranian government that I will appoint, we can troll it together. We can toll it, make a lot of money to be made." I mean, is that any more lunatic than what McKinley said on November 21st, 1899? I think so, but I don't know. I mean, we do this a lot. Over historically, and I really hope that in the aftermath of these debaucular presidencies of Donald Trump, it will sober us up a little bit, and that the sobriety will last a little bit, and that the world will be safer and better for it. An America that doesn't feel as though it's too exceptionalist, right? Or that redefines its exceptionalism in a way that is a bit more tracks a little bit better with reality.
I think when Donald Trump makes these outlandish claims, he tries to shape reality or bend reality to his will. And sometimes he succeeds and sometimes he doesn't. I don't know.
Not in contact with reality. He really not.
I've referred a couple times in writing to Donald Trump. I mean, a lot of it, if you're not an American, you may not know this book, Harold and the Purple Crayon. It's a very, very famous children's book by doesn't matter who is, doesn't matter, Crockett Johnson, right? And Harold has this purple crayon, and he climbs out of his bedroom window, and he makes reality with this purple crayon, and he's trying to find his way back to his bedroom window. That's what the book's about, Donald Trump also has a purple crayon, but it's the purple crayon from hell. And he's drawing his fantasies in the world the way that he wants it, but he's doing it at the expense of the Lebenswelt. He's trying to destroy the actual world and substitute instead his egomaniacal fantasy world for it. He is completely out of touch with reality these days. Even if he wasn't so out of touch in the first term, he certainly has become so over the past 7 or 8 years. He is simply off on his own.
The frontal lobe looks like mush.
People have said that he's a narcissist for a long time, and that's true. People have been concerned about his increasing signs of dementia, and that's true, and possibly that he had a mild stroke some months ago, and that's true. But what people seem to have missed, as far as I can see, and what I have stressed, he has always had a fantasy-prone personality. And that's an actual thing in the psychology books, right? I don't see how people have missed it. He has a fantasy-prone personality. He has daydreamed. If you look this up, you see that his personality, his life, matches every one of the definitive elements of a fantasy-prone personality.
That's just extreme NPD, Adam. I mean, that's the textbook case of narcissistic personality disorder with a borderline substrate.
I don't think he's got a borderline substrate. I think he's definitely a malignant narcissist in the sense of he's a narcissist, a statist, and there's a third component to malignant narcissism.
Sure. But I think all narcissism, all NPD. So you can look up Frank Yeomans on this, and I'll send some links.
I've been immersed in the literature and personality disorder.
Yeah, but so NPD is very difficult to treat because it is an adaptive response to borderline disorganization.
Personality.
It's a fantasy personality, correct? Yes.
So I got to jump in here quickly. I think the difference here is that Trump does have a fantasy person. I think that there is really truly something to that. But you could look at other leaders like Winston Churchill, who, all throughout his life he fantasized about being a leader and doing great things in the world. But he actually, I think, to a certain degree, understood certain fundamentals about how the world works, right. Foreign policy, defense policy. I mean, he was a Secretary of the Navy, and he was out there. He was a genius. First of all, he understood history, but he also had a lot of practical application. And a guy like Trump, who has all these fantasies. I mean, you just look at this war in Iran, and he clearly had no understanding of what he was getting himself into. So that's the difference for me.
Yeah. And when Winston Churchill was a literate man, he read and wrote books.
Right? Oh yeah, that too helps.
Donald Trump has a crayon. Let me repeat: a crayon. It's purple. It's a crayon.
Which I guess takes us back to our original point here.
Yeah, can I close clear by reading a quote from a neuroanatomist? I love this quote. It's so illuminating. This is a guy named Ezekiel Morcella who studies reading, and he writes as follows: even reading a single word written in a phonetic alphabet, here's the quote, is no trivial process. A single written word can reliably and insuppressibly activate two different kinds of mental representations, one based on vision, one on audition, involving different brain areas and yielding two separate conscious contents, each of which is activated insuppressibly. In other words, when we read, even though we are reading symbols for phonemes, for sounds, when we are using our visual, we're looking at the words, but we are activating both the visual and the oral parts of our brain simultaneously. We're giving our brain perspective, one side to the other side. There is no other single activity that human beings do that achieves that brain state. Okay. It also raises whatever we're doing from, if we're in theta, it raises it to alpha or even into low beta. Our brain is working quicker. It's working more intensely. That's what reading does anatomically. That's what it does neurologically. And it's from that physical phenomenon that all the rest of the benefits of a literate world follow. So I just wanted to get the science in as a kind of a last word.
Yeah. Tim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like in my corner of the world, which is in New England, just outside of Boston, I live in a very, upper middle class suburb, Andover, which is where Phillips Academy is. I think we, in the United States, until the 1950s, were actually like some of the biggest cheerleaders of this, Protestant evangelical foreign policy project. And then we kind of turned completely against it, in the early days of Vietnam. So maybe the rest of the country does what we did. There's always been an isolationist part of New England, but I think people often forget about the interventionist Protestant missionary kind of tradition that came out of this region that is really now kind of dead. I don't think anyone would carry on. The John Birch Society was founded not that far from where I live. Something most people wouldn't even know about unless you're a really serious scholar of foreign policy. So I think there is a possibility, if you look at why New England kind of turned against Vietnam very early on, the rest of the country could go through the same analysis of American foreign policy post-Trump.
Adam, I know you want to see the bright side in this, but it seems to me that there isn't one. I don't think that I think what's going to happen after Trump is massive disillusionment. and a renunciation of all the positive values associated with American exceptionalism, both abroad and domestically.
Could be. I mean, we could boomerang the wrong way for a while. I mean, that's the nature of human emotion in politics. You tend to overdo things this way and that. Yeah, possible.
When in history has a humiliating geopolitical catastrophe conjoined with massive economic shock, and the economic shocks are going to be coming fast and furious from now on, because we're going to be losing our position as the reserve currency.
You think so? You put your finger on a very, very important subject. I don't know enough about it to know if that's inevitable, but
I think our superpower days are over. We've lost our alliance structure. We've lost our reputation.
You're right. There are very few examples of a major power of the kind the United States has been engaging in an act of self-abnegation.
There's nothing.
It doesn't happen very often, put it mildly. Simon mentioned the religious revival in early mid-18th century Britain, the Lord Shaftesbury's revival. Things like that do happen. There have been several, 3 at least, some people say now 4 great awakenings in American history, and they were all based on similarly Shaftesburyan upheavals of that kind. But these things take time. They take time to roll out. And there's a lot of wobbling back and forth and missing the middle mark all the time. If I were as pessimistic as James Marriott is, and as Mary Harrington is, and as you seem to be, I would just take my book and use it for fireplace stoking, and I would just forget the whole thing and just sit in my garden all day. And I could do that, but that's just not my nature. It isn't my nature to give up. Because there's so many smart people, so many good people, so many compassionate people, so many truly wonderful people around that we all know. I mean, I just can't, it's just not my nature to give up. I continue to look for the opportunities in the mayhem.
Well, I think there's 2 sorts of not giving up, though, right, Adam and Claire? So this is where I might differ from some people on this call. I don't think a lot of the institutions can be saved. So to me, not giving up looks more like accepting the damage and trying to plant the seed of the next round of institutions out of the pieces and components of what we had. And if you look at the sack of Rome, well, first of all, with Trump, so the Roman Empire in the West toddled on for another 500 years after Nero. So we might not be an imminent collapse. And of course, the Eastern Roman Empire toddled on until, it was incredible, right? And we would, without the sack of Rome, we wouldn't have had the Venetian Empire. Without the Venetian Empire and the city-states, we wouldn't have had the Renaissance. So I think that, but I think the biggest mistake that educated people like this group can make is to ignore the extent to which the institutions that we are trying to save has ceased to serve ordinary people. And this makes me somewhat of a, I don't know what it makes me. I don't want to label it. But so I think there's a lot of, there are a lot of attempts to assume that these institutions are good and doing good and save them. But then you look at things like healthcare in the US and the administrative bloat, and you look at the inefficiencies, and you look at the sort of the poor management. So when Tim was talking earlier about all these white collar jobs, I mean, I do have some sympathy for Doge. I think they went about it in the wrong way. And this is my problem with Trump in general. I think he identified, at least when he was still compos mentis in 2015, he identified a lot of the problems and then went about not solving them and making them worse. Right? So he capitalized on real problems. I mean, the reason he came to power was all the institutionalists of the Democratic and Republican Party, they were not willing to I mean, I actually think that low energy Jeb Bush wasn't just a personal slur. It was actually, it was almost like an existential statement about the system that was too low energy to figure out what its problems were. The problem with Trump was that he was deeply self-serving, narcissistic, in it for himself, could only see one chess move ahead. Like, he had all these problems, but he did spot the thing. He called out the elephants in the rooms that no one else was willing to call out, right? And
but most of the elephants he called out weren't elephants at all. The idea that NATO is ripping us off, I mean, that's just ridiculous.
No, that's true. I'm being very sloppy here because I'm making a horrendous sweeping generalization. But I think let me restate. He tapped into popular dissatisfaction about specific long-run trends of US and Western economic policy that empirically served the top 10 to 20% of society quite well and did not serve the bottom 50%. He tapped into that energy. In terms of the content of his statements, it was random and chaotic, and NATO is just one example, right? And I think, again, he only sees one move ahead. So he sees this enraged mass, and because he's enraged underneath.
And Bernie Sanders' diagnosis was a lot closer to reality. I don't think it's not a diagnosis I would have endorsed myself, but Trump managed to tap into the general wave of discontent, but I don't think that's so unusual. What was so unusual about Trump is that he did that in conjunction with presenting a total fantasy world that usually any adult would have seen as a total fantasy world, or any.
Not only that, Claire also, I mean, I take the point that there were, you know, I think Trump did lash onto these populist issues like illegal immigration, as many Americans see it, was the big one. So he said, I'm going to fix this. And like, this has been a lingering problem for decades. So Trump comes along as a populist and says, okay, I'm going to fix this. The problem is he doesn't do it by the traditional means that our laws and our Constitution has been set up for Americans to legally deal with these problems. So in essence, when you're just going around the Constitution and when you're trampling on it and just ruling by fiat, to me, that's just kind of like burning down the village to save it.
What do you mean about our institutions not being savable? Which institutions specifically? Representative democracy, freedom of expression, the rule of law?
Well, first and foremost, the Constitution, right? I mean, because all the issues, like when you're working around the Congress.
Simon answered this because you said they weren't savable. I didn't think you said that.
Yeah. So I have to, you're forcing me to be more precise than I was 5 minutes ago. So I'm going to give it my best shot. So I think that the system, the political economic system in aggregate, is not delivering is not delivering the outcomes that people think that they are voting for. So I have to choose my words very carefully here. So people think they're voting for various things. I would say that, you know, neither the politicians nor the general public necessarily understand the deep complexities all that well. So they keep trying to vote for their interests.
Back to which institutions do you think aren't salvageable?
I think the United States Congress in its current form is unable to solve the problems that the people want it to solve for a variety of reasons, including the role of money and power.
Congress isn't salvageable. What do you propose instead of representative democracy?
I have an answer to that. Simon off the hook here. Simon is wriggling at the end of the hook. So,
yes, Claire does this to me on a weekly basis, by the way.
I have an answer. I have an answer to that. If you want.
I want to hear what Simon thinks about which institutions we can't say.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to restate my previous statement and say, I think a lot of the institutions are savable in some form, but not in their current form with their current operating mechanisms.
Reform.
Yes. Look, I was being hyperbolic because I think that I don't think they're capable. You've actually nailed it. I do think reform. I don't think they're capable of reforming themselves. So I'm not calling for them to break. I'm observing that they are going to. And the reason I'm observing that they're going to is I would be a reformer. I am a reformer. I have been a reformer for 20 years. I see increasing evidence of structural incapacity within the system for that kind of reform. How's that? Is that a good answer?
Both the House and the Senate and pass HR 1, that might help.
This is your area of expertise, not mine. Tell me, Claire.
I can go a long ways.
Let me throw.
Good. Let's do that then.
Let me throw out. I think with institutions, I always tell people, and I think this is more common I make at the international level. A lot of international institutions, if we got rid of them, we would still have a need to recreate them. The European Union. Now, I would argue the European Union isn't quite the same institution it was after Britain left. It has now one less member and one significantly less member. But for the rest of the states other than Britain on the continent, there's a real need. And you see that, even before there was the EU, there was the Benelux economic union between Belgium and the Netherlands. So a lot of international institutions, maybe you could see changes in membership. But there would still be a need for a NATO, even if the U.S. wasn't in.
For UN.
What? Yes. Now, I think some universal institutions like the WTO, the UN, I think they're kind of already in a comatose state. So I wouldn't even describe them as, it doesn't. I mean, the UN, they have a nice convention essentially every September in New York where the whole General Assembly's in town and there's lots of traffic. And it actually does provide an economic benefit to the New York City economy. So, yeah, it has its benefit in that regard. But I think, I think where I disagree with, where I initially disagree with Simon is I think a lot of institutions, you can't just eliminate them because you still have the need for them. In terms of reforming them, that gets very messy. Now, I know Simon brought up healthcare. Healthcare in America is like a nightmare. And it's not just a nightmare because the system is quote unquote bad. It's just so very complex and very difficult to unwind. I've had discussions. I was just at someone from Switzerland when I was at Disney World a couple of weeks ago. I got talking to them. They're like, "Oh, it's so horrible in America. You guys don't have, health care." I'm like, "Wait a minute. I happen to know in Switzerland you actually have a private healthcare system." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I have to pay 600 francs a month for health insurance." And I tried explaining to him that our system the problem is our system has all the similarities between our system and his system that he didn't really know about. But it's just this very complex mess of pieces. So healthcare, like in America, I almost tell people, I know it's something that concerns people. I feel it myself. But you gotta, I don't know how you fix that institution. But I agree with Simon, with Congress, maybe going back to having senators appointed by state legislatures, something. But you can't just abolish these institutions and because you'd have to replace them with something else still. And what's the something else?
The burn it all down impulse is one to which I am categorically opposed.
Yeah.
I want to be clear. That's not what I was advocating for. I think I was expressing a long-standing concern that tension is building up in the system because the institutions are finding it very, very difficult to reform themselves, to bring themselves back into alignment with the popular will. and that this is what generates populism. This is what generates anti-democratic
Yeah.
feeling. So my statement was, I want to be really clear. I'm not a revolutionary. I was trying to be diagnostic.
Yeah, and I think it's going to get worse because the damage Trump has done is going to be felt for decades, and people's standards of living are going to decline because of it. And the economy will never be what it was. We've lost something.
No, but you can't blame it all on Trump. I mean, the level of degeneration in the UK right now is astounding.
The UK also did something really, really stupid.
But it goes back to Adam's prime thesis. It's there was an old Atlantic article that basically said one of the problems we had with our major political parties was that candidates, like democracy was working really well when the candidates were selected by party grandees.
Of course.
And you got a constrained set of choices, and that actually too much democracy in the primary process.
Yeah.
We simply, I mean,
so
we didn't think we should have this much democracy. No one in their right mind thinks we should have this much democracy. Plato didn't, Aristotle didn't, Tocqueville didn't, Mill didn't. Not even the great Democrats in history thought this much democracy would be a good idea.
We don't have a democracy. We have a republic. People keep forgetting. That's what Madison wrote. It's a republic. It's not a democracy. It's not
if you can keep it.
Parliamentary democracy. It never was meant to.
When we got the idea that more democracy would necessarily be better, that democracy being good, more of it would be even better, I'm not quite sure. Does anyone know where that idea entered our consciousness?
The Vietnam era.
Progressive era, pretty much.
Progressive era. Yeah, a lot of stuff with direct democracy, direct election of senators, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I
also think there was another shift towards primaries.
Yeah, that was later.
In Vietnam, the Vietnam era.
I blame the primary system for like 7% of what ails us.
A lot. Yeah, it's gotten pretty deranged. But there is a solution to all this. I wrote a Substack piece a couple of months ago about somebody most of you probably never heard of. A very strange sort of idiot savant guy named Leopold Kohr, Kohr. And he was an idiot in lots of ways, but he was a savant in one way. And that is he saw the importance of scale. And his analysis was that this country, the United States, is just too big. And things don't scale right because it's too big. It's just outside of human scale. Kirkpatrick Sale wrote about this. E.F. Schumacher wrote Small is Beautiful. My solution is to go back, not to go back, but to build a new subsidiarity, to rebuild grassroots, face-to-face, human relational democracy at levels below the federal level. At the federal level is way overweighted. The
Swiss did it, Adam.
Exactly, and that was because of the Great Depression, because of World War II, because of what technology did in the aftermath of the Second World War. Somebody mentioned before repealing the 17th Amendment, going back to the indirect election at the Senate through state houses. I am for that. I really am. Not yet. And this is not a silver bullet because there's a lot of know-nothingism on the state and local levels, a lot of sort of nastiness, including racism, misogyny, you name it. But still, you've got to give people a stake in their own decisions. When you alienate agencies so much that people feel like they're not even a drop of water in the ocean, and that large corporations and alienated major parties that are alienated from individuals are making all the decisions, and that your view doesn't matter. When you do that, eventually you end up with a degenerate form of sort of passive democracy. You end up with the spectocracy. These things are related. One of the reasons we have spectocracy, we have an age of spectacle, we have a spectacleized politics, is that people don't feel empowered by the organization of the political order the way that it has grown. It needs to be redacted back to a stage of new subsidiarity where people feel as though their views actually matter. They have the ability to actually understand what's going on. Local politics, I mean, Tip O'Neill said this.
But the Uniparty hates that, Adam.
Politics. People have to be engaged in and understand. That's why unions are so important. Because whatever else unions do in terms of wages and respect, being in a union is being in a political organization. Yeah. Right? That's why that's one of the many reasons why
training.
unionization and especially unionizing the lower echelons of the income earning parts of America, the American political profile is so important to me. I wrote recently on.
I really miss the significance of unions. That's something I regret.
So I said there are solutions to these problems, and I every major reform in American history has been bottom up. It's been a social movement that's pushed lazy and self-centered and satisfied politicians to do what they never would have thought to do on their own. There's only one exception in American history, and that was the New Deal. That was weird, right? Those were the Roosevelts. Otherwise, every single major positive motion in American social history has been from the bottom up. It's been a social movement, and those are messy. They can be violent. They take a long time. You get strange, odd bedfellows in some of these movements, like the mugwumps back in the day, anti-imperialists. These things take
strange bedfellows these days too.
The point is, it's got to be energized at the local level where people really live, where people really engage one another. We have a scaling problem. We have a very serious scaling problem. And I think ultimately the solution to the mess that we're in is this new subsidiarity. I don't spend a lot of time in the book writing about this. Just the very end of chapter 10, the last chapter, a little bit in the epilogue. But if I ever write another nonfiction book, that's what it's going to be about. I hope I probably don't do that because, my God, this one's been such a pain in the ass.
Yeah. was gonna comment just from my perspective here in Massachusetts. I think subsidiarity works in some states like mine because you have the state government and state capital in the main center of population and media. So you're always going to get a lot of coverage of state government in the Boston Globe, in the government for most of the population in the state which lives around Boston. State government's very accessible. But in much of the country, for historical reasons, state government is often a very remote, if you live most people in Virginia now live in Northern Virginia, but the state capital is in Richmond. In Florida, it's in Tallahassee, which is quite a long ways from South Florida. And you see press coverage. I've actually seen studies where journalism professors here at some of the universities here in Boston have compared coverage of state politics in states where the capital is in the main metropole, and in states where it is not in the main metropole, and there's far more coverage of state government and state legislatures in states like Massachusetts, where the main newspaper and radio and TV stations are right in the same city as the capital, compared to, let's say, a Florida. And that goes, the reason you have these state capitals in these very odd locations goes almost back to colonial times. But I think in a state like Massachusetts, subsidiarity works because the state government is very well covered and very accessible. But in other parts of the US, state government is almost, is very distant and very much not covered by the media, especially in our current media environment where the media is in the secular decline.
Excuse me for barging in, Sean. I see that you have your hand up because I'm going to have to check out here soon. I just want to make sure that we don't have anyone who has an outstanding question that they haven't had a chance to ask yet. Robert, you've been very quiet. Uncommonly quiet.
I'm trying to be more quiet and contemplative. I know. I see. Imagine that. No, I'm really trying to absorb and digest this more than anything. I think I don't see how this dynamic. I'm coming right back to the comments about the pre-literate. How this is going to benefit the ordinary person anytime in the near future. I see the urge to farm out our intellect to AI as being accelerated by this. That's just my intuition. I don't know if I can back that up with fact, but that's how it seems to me.
Yeah, look, just speaking of the Age of Spectacle project, and my take on this, I mean, I agree with that. I think that where the culture is headed is in a bad direction. But I think that what is in front of us is not an abyss that doesn't have a bottom. It's a canyon that does have a bottom. There's a crash point, and history is long unfurled before us, and we will have a chance in due course, probably not in my lifetime, to recover from this. And when we do, I think that if we're going to succeed in the United States and North America, we need to fix the scaling problem. We need to get politics back, and we need to integrate concepts of human flourishing and how politics is engaged with concepts of human flourishing. And if we could just do that, I think we could do that. We can pick up the pieces, and we can refound the country along a somewhat different spatial organizational order. You know, I think it's possible. I think it may take 150 years. I don't really know, but I agree with, you know, I agree with
like you managed to pitter
for hours and hours.
rearrange, clean, pitter.
What's that?
Amazingly stupid.
What's that? Where?
Who's that?
I don't know. It was a poltergeist.
Carrie's phone was the source of that.
Was it Carrie's phone? It was the malefactor. There we go. I've muted it. All right. I'm gonna have to get going here, but Sean, I wanted you to.
Yeah, Claire, I'll just real quick, the conversation off 5 minutes ago about, you know, reform and civic engagement and, you know, what can be done. I couldn't help but go back to, and I think this kind of circles back to Adam's kind of some of his main arguments. The fact that we had several years ago a President Trump who, you know, launched a violent attack on our democratic system, tried to steal an election, and we still, as a country, can't seem to sort through that whole event. There's just conflicting narratives, and it's been politicized. And still to this day, you have an administration that's trying to twist and distort facts. So I just come back to this, you know, in thinking about that, somehow there's something larger going on at the grassroots that we have to sort through, and that gets into information and sifting through. And I guess it does come back to Adam's argument about the erosion of deep literacy. When I look at something as clear cut as that, to me, it cuts to the heart of the dilemma that we're at and some of the things that Adam's getting at. That's all. It's just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, like I said to start, this is the situation we're in is remarkably bad. It's sprawling and it's recondite. And to understand it takes a real effort. And to deal with it takes an even greater effort. And there we are. I mean, I think that pretty much nutshells it.
And there we are. I don't want to interrupt a conversation that people are enjoying. So I'm going to transfer the conversation to someone else so that you can stay. Yes, exactly. Simon, would you like to host the conversation? Simon? Okay. I'm going to.
Yes.
Simon will host the conversation. Adam, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I enjoyed this. I appreciated some of the very good questions. We got a little off the Age of Spectacle platform there.
But I think it was really good that everyone came having already read the articles so that we could have a conversation that didn't require you to explain it.
I totally agree with that.
Thank you everyone for doing the reading and for your good questions, and I will see you next week.
Yes, and
thank you.
Thank you so much.
It was a great conversation.
Thanks a lot, Adam.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Bye.